"Get out of my house now," David shouted, his face red with anger. I stood there in our living room, stunned by the audacity of his words. This was the same man who hadn't paid a single dollar towards our $3,800 monthly rent in the past year. Yet here he was, trying to kick me and our 12-year-old son out of our home. "Your house," I let out a bitter laugh. "The house that I've been paying for entirely on my own." My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from pure rage. Just an hour ago, we were having what I thought would be a normal conversation about his parents. "They're getting older," he had said. "They need to move in with us." No discussion, no asking, just telling me that his parents would be taking over our spare room. When I refused, his true colors came out. "If you don't want to live with my parents, then you can leave," he had sneered. "They're moving in next month, whether you like it or not." I looked around our luxury apartment, the one I had worked countless overtime hours to afford, the one where every piece of furniture had been bought with my salary. Our son, Tommy, stood in his doorway, his school bag still on his shoulder, watching another one of our arguments unfold. The sight of his worried face made something snap inside me. "Fine," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I'll leave, but don't worry about what I might take with me." David shrugged, already turning away. "Just don't touch my music equipment. Do whatever you want with everything else. I'm going out now, but I'll be back tomorrow evening. Make sure you're gone by then." As the door slammed behind him, a strange sense of peace washed over me. After 13 years of marriage, this was at my breaking point. But for the first time in years, I felt in control. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. David had no idea what was coming, but he was about to learn a very expensive lesson about taking me for granted. Mom Tommy's voice was small but steady. "I'll help you pack. And I want to go with you. I'm Sarah Wilson, 33, and until last week, I thought I was living the perfect life that everyone dreams of. I'm a finance manager at one of the top firms in the city, pulling in a comfortable 6-figure salary. My office sits on the 47th floor with a view that most people only see in magazines. From the outside, everything looked perfect: the career, the luxury apartment, the family. But perfect is a funny word when you're the only one holding everything together. I met David back in college. He was the charming music major who could light up a room with his guitar and dreams of becoming the next big thing. I was a practical business student who fell for his creative spirit. We were young, in love, and thought we could conquer the world together. Now, 13 years later, I'm still conquering, just alone. Our son Tommy is 12 now, a quiet, sensitive boy who's had to grow up watching his parents drift further apart each year. He's got my logical mind and his father's artistic soul, but lately I've noticed him becoming more withdrawn, especially during our arguments. No child should have to tiptoe around their own home, but that's what our life has become. David? Well, at 35, he's still the same dreamer I met in college, minus the charm and a whole lot of entitlement. While I climbed the corporate ladder, he bounced between part-time jobs, still clinging to his dream of making it big in music. His band broke up years ago, but he kept insisting he just needed more time, more equipment, and more understanding from me. We lived in a luxury apartment building downtown, 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view of the city that cost $3,800 a month, a price tag that came solely out of my paycheck, while David contributed nothing but complaints about how I didn't support his dreams enough. You might wonder why I stayed so long. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was for Tommy, or maybe it was just easier to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. But when David announced his parents were moving into the home I paid for, without even asking me, something finally clicked. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't just paying the rent all these years. I was paying for the privilege of being taken for granted. But sometimes, life gives you a chance to rewrite your story. This is mine. Our love story started like many others, young, hopeful, and completely blind to the red flags. I was 20, halfway through my business degree, when I first saw David performing at a campus coffee shop. He was 22, with his guitar and that confident smile that made everyone believe in his dreams. I still remember thinking, this guy is going somewhere. We got married just 8 months after I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but David seemed so sure about everything. "We'll make it work," he said, holding my hand in the courthouse. "I'll take care of you both, I promise." I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored my parents' concerns about his lack of a steady job. The first year was tough but manageable. I finished my degree while working part-time, and David played gigs at local bars while doing odd jobs. We lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, and when Tommy was born, we converted half the living room into a nursery. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like we were building something together. Looking back, I should have seen the pattern starting. Every time a steady job opportunity came up, David had an excuse. It would take time away from my music, or I'm just about to get my big break. Meanwhile, I landed an entry-level position at a finance firm, working 60-hour weeks while juggling a newborn. "Just give me a year," he'd say. "My band is getting noticed. We just need to record a demo, so I supported us, thinking it was temporary. 1 year turned into 2, then 5. His band would play small venues, maybe draw a crowd of 100 people on a good night. They'd make enough to cover their equipment and drinks, while I covered everything else. The breaking point should have been Tommy's first day of school. David had promised to be there, but he had a crucial band meeting that morning. I sat alone among all the other parents, watching Tommy scan the crowd for his dad's face. That night, David came home excited about a potential gig that could change everything. He didn't even ask how Tommy's day went. Still, I made excuses for him. He's passionate, I'd tell my friends. He's following his dreams, but while David chased his dreams, I was living in reality, paying bills, arranging playdates, attending parent-teacher conferences alone. My salary kept increasing, and with each raise, David became more comfortable letting me handle everything. "You're so good with money," he'd say, as if it were a compliment, rather than an excuse to avoid responsibility. "Besides, when I make it big, I'll pay you back everything." That's the thing about living with a dreamer, they're so good at selling the future that you forget to look at the present. For 13 years, I bought into that future, until the day David decided to add his parents to our household without even consulting me. That's when I finally woke up and realized some dreams cost too much. The cracks in our marriage started small, like hairline fractures that you only notice when they've spread too far to fix. It began with little things, David forgetting to pay his share of the utilities, spending hundreds on new guitar strings while I struggled to buy Tommy's school supplies, coming home late from gigs with nothing but stories about almost getting signed. Our arguments always followed the same pattern. "You need to contribute more," I'd say, waving bills in his face. "Tommy's growing up, expenses are increasing, and I can't keep carrying everything alone." "You sound just like my mother," he'd snap back, always nagging about money. "Can't you see I'm investing in our future?" His investments were piling up in our spare room: amplifiers, mixers, electric guitars, thousands of dollars of equipment bought on credit cards I didn't even know he had. Then came the lying. Small lies at first, about where money went or why he needed to borrow from our joint account. "It's for a crucial networking event," he'd say, only for me to later find receipts from bars and music shops. Once, he asked for $500 to repair his guitar. A week later, I saw him wearing a brand new leather jacket. It was on sale, he claimed. The price tag he forgot to remove said $450. The financial strain was crushing. My salary looked good on paper, $95,000 a year, but living in the city isn't cheap. Rent, utilities, Tommy's private school because the public schools in our area were struggling, my student loans, and David's endless music expenses ate through everything. I couldn't even start a college fund for Tommy. "Mom," Tommy asked one day, age 10, "why does Dad never come to my school events?" We were sitting at dinner, just the two of us again. David was at another promising gig, playing background music at a local restaurant for $50 and free drinks. How do you explain to your child that their father prioritizes a failing dream over their childhood? The pandemic should have been a wake-up call. While I worked from home, juggling Zoom meetings and helping Tommy with online classes, David saw it as his big opportunity. He spent our stimulus check on recording equipment, convinced that virtual concerts would be his breakthrough. They weren't. Every month became a juggling act. I'd pay the essential bills first: rent, utilities, Tommy's school. Then groceries. Whatever was left went to savings, which David somehow always found reasons to dip into. "It's an emergency," he'd say. The emergency was usually new speakers, or a vintage microphone he just had to have. His band members gradually moved on, getting real jobs, starting families, facing reality. But not David. At 35, he was still living like a college student, except college students usually have part-time jobs. His occasional bartending gigs barely covered his phone bill. "When are you going to grow up?" I finally asked one night, after he missed Tommy's school concert for another failed audition. "When are you going to stop trying to change me?" He shot back. "This is who I am. If you don't like it, maybe you married the wrong person." Maybe I had. But it took his parents moving in for me to finally admit it. The idea of moving to a bigger apartment came during one of our rare peaceful moments. Tommy had just turned 11, and our small apartment was bursting at the seams with David's music equipment, Tommy's growing collection of books and sports gear, and the remnants of my attempt to maintain a home office in the corner of our bedroom. "We need more space," David announced one evening, scrolling through luxury apartment listings on his phone. "Look at this place, it's in Skyline Towers. Imagine how impressive that would be for my music contacts." I glanced at the price, $3,800 a month, and felt my stomach drop. "That's almost double what we're paying now," I said carefully. "How do you suggest we afford that?" His response was typical David: "You're making good money now. Plus, I promise I'll help with the bills this time. I'll cover utilities and groceries." "Come on, Sarah. This could be our fresh start." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe the pressure of living in a luxury apartment would finally push him to take responsibility. Maybe this would be the change we needed. I signed the lease, paid the security deposit, and arranged the move. David's only contribution was picking out the view he wanted for his music room. The first month in our new place felt like a dream. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and a doorman who knew our names. David even paid the first utility bill, $200 for electricity. He acted like he'd just funded our retirement. But by month 3, the pattern emerged again. "I'm a little short this month," he'd say. "Can you cover the utilities? I'll pay you back when this gig pays off." The gig never paid off, and neither did David. Meanwhile, the expenses kept mounting. The luxury building had luxury maintenance fees. Tommy's school was further away now, adding transportation costs. The utility bills were higher because David insisted on keeping his music room at the perfect temperature for his instruments. "You promised to help with expenses," I reminded him 6 months in. We were standing in our beautiful kitchen with its perfect view of the city lights. "I just paid another month's rent alone." "I am helping," he protested. "Who bought groceries last week?" "You bought takeout for yourself and your band practice. That's not groceries for the family." He shrugged. "At least I'm contributing something. You're always so focused on money. This view inspires my creativity. Isn't that worth something?" The view was costing us $3,800 a month, and I was the only one seeing the bill. But that's the thing about living beyond your means, someone has to pay the price. In our case, that someone was always me. Little did I know that the apartment upgrade that was supposed to be our fresh start would become the backdrop for our final breakdown. The day everything finally fell apart started like any other. I was reviewing our monthly budget at the kitchen table when David casually dropped his bombshell. "My parents are moving in next month," he announced, not even looking up from his phone. "I told them they could have the spare room." I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. "You? What?" "They're getting older," he said, as if that explained everything. "They need help, and we must take care of them. I already promised them." The spare room, my home office, where I worked overtime to pay our bills, where I handled all our finances, where I kept our family running, and he'd given it away without even asking me. "David, we can't afford to support 2 more people," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're barely managing as it is." He finally looked up, his face hardening. "They'll contribute to the bills. Besides, Mom can help with cooking and cleaning." I knew what that meant. His parents would move in, and suddenly I'd be responsible for not just David and Tommy, but 2 more adults who'd expect me to handle everything. The cooking, the cleaning, the shopping, the bills, all while working full-time to pay for everyone. "No," I said firmly. "This isn't happening. You can't just decide something like this without discussing it with me first." "There's nothing to discuss," he snapped. "They're my parents. What kind of daughter-in-law refuses to help a family? The kind who's already carrying this entire household on her shoulders," I shot back. "Have you even told them you don't contribute to the rent? That I pay for everything while you chase your music dreams?" His face turned red. "That's different. I'm an artist. You're 35 years old, David. Your band broke up years ago. Everyone else moved on, got real jobs, and grew up. But you're still acting like a teenager, and now you want to add your parents to the mix." That's when he said it, the words that finally shattered our marriage beyond repair. "If you don't want to live with my parents," he growled, "then you can get out. This is my house too, and they're moving in whether you like it or not." At that moment, looking at his entitled, angry face, I realized something. This wasn't about his parents at all. This was about control. He couldn't control our finances or his failing music career, so he was trying to control me instead. But he'd made one crucial mistake. This wasn't his house, it was mine. And I was done letting him pretend otherwise. "Get out of my house now," David shouted, his face red with rage. I stood in our living room, staring at the man I'd supported for 13 years, feeling oddly calm despite his outburst. "Your house," I let out a small laugh. "The house where you've never paid a single bill? That house. I contribute in other ways," he sputtered. "My music." "Your music hasn't paid for a single thing in this apartment," I cut him off. "Not the rent, not the groceries, not even Tommy's school supplies." Speaking of Tommy, I heard his bedroom door crack open. Our son stood there, backpack still on his shoulder, watching another one of our arguments unfold. But this time was different. This time I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Relief. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "If that's what you want, I'll leave. But don't you want to check what I might take with me?" David waved his hand dismissively. "Just don't touch my music equipment. Do whatever you want with everything else." He grabbed his jacket. "I'm going out now, but I'll be back tomorrow evening. Make sure you're gone by then." The door slammed behind him, and suddenly the apartment felt lighter, as if a heavy cloud had finally lifted. I looked around at our luxury apartment, every piece of furniture, every appliance, every item bought with my salary. A plan started forming in my mind. Mom Tommy's voice was quiet but sure. "I'll help you pack. And I want to go with you." I turned to my son, seeing the same strength I felt growing inside me reflected in his eyes. At 12 years old, he understood more than I'd given him credit for. Are you sure, honey? This is your home. He shook his head. Home is where we're both happy, Mom. And we haven't been happy here for a long time. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. This wasn't the time for crying. This was the time for action. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. David had no idea what was coming, but he was about to learn a very expensive lesson about taking me for granted. Sometimes, the breaking point isn't really about breaking, it's about finally standing up for yourself. Let's get started, I told Tommy, already dialing the first number. We have work to do. As I hung up the phone, a sense of calm washed over me. Everything was arranged, the movers would arrive first thing tomorrow morning. But not just any movers. Are you sure about this? Mom, Tommy asked, sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor as he sorted through his belongings. Remember when your dad said I could do whatever I wanted with everything except his music equipment? I smiled. Well, I'm taking him at his word. I'd called a junk removal service, not movers. Everything in this apartment that David hadn't specifically forbidden me to touch: the couch we'd bought last year, the expensive kitchen appliances, the dining room set, even the fancy coffee maker he loved so much would be gone by tomorrow afternoon. Back only what you need, I told Tommy. Clothes, school things, your important items. We'll start fresh with everything else. While Tommy packed, I made 3 more calls. First, my bank removed David's access to our joint account. Second, to my lawyer, I wanted everything documented properly. And third, to a small furnished apartment I'd found near Tommy's school. The rent was less than half of what I'd been paying here. What about Dad's stuff? Tommy asked, looking at the guitars mounted on the living room wall. We'll leave his precious equipment exactly where it is, I replied, along with his clothes and personal items. Everything else, I gestured around the apartment, is fair game. I'd spent 13 years furnishing this place, making it comfortable, creating a home. Now, in less than 24 hours, I would strip it bare. David would come home to an empty apartment with nothing but his guitars and dreams to keep him company. Was it petty? Maybe? But sometimes pettiness feels an awful lot like justice. Get some sleep, honey, I told Tommy. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. As I lay in bed that night, I felt no regret, no sadness, just a growing sense of freedom. David had told me to leave his house, but he was about to learn whose house it was, one missing furniture piece at a time. The junk removal crew arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. I watched as they efficiently cleared out the apartment room by room, piece by piece. By noon, the space echoed with emptiness, just David's music equipment and clothes remaining like islands in a bare sea. At 6:45 p.m., right on schedule, my phone rang. What the hell did you do? David's voice crackled through the speaker, a mix of panic and rage. Where's all our stuff? You mean my stuff? I kept my voice calm. The stuff you said I could do whatever I wanted with. The furniture? The fridge? The TV? Those were marital assets, he sputtered. You should have thought about that before telling me to do whatever I want with everything except your precious equipment, I replied. By the way, your guitars are fine. This isn't funny, Sarah. How am I supposed to live here? Maybe you could sell some of your equipment, I suggested. Or better yet, get a real job. Tommy, sitting beside me in our newly furnished apartment, squeezed my hand supportively. Is Tommy with you? David's voice softened slightly. Yes. Dad, Tommy spoke up. I chose to come with Mom. There was a long pause. I could almost hear David's world crashing down around him in that empty apartment. We'll be filing for divorce, I said firmly. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. Divorce, he laughed nervously. Come on, you're just angry. We can work this. No, David. We can't. You told me to leave your house, remember? So I did. And I took everything that was mine with me. After I hung up, Tommy and I ordered pizza and sat on our new couch in our smaller, cozier apartment. For the first time in years, we both felt at peace. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting free. 3 months have passed since that night. Our new apartment might be half the size of our old one, but it's filled with twice the happiness. Tommy's grades have improved, and I've noticed him smiling more often. Without the constant drain of supporting David, I've even managed to start a college fund for him. David? Well, reality hit him hard. When he tried to take over the lease for the luxury apartment, he learned some expensive truths. First, that the rent was $3,800 a month. Second, with his part-time income, he didn't qualify to rent a cardboard box, let alone a high-rise apartment. His parents, once they learned the full story, refused to enable him anymore. Last I heard, he's living in a studio apartment across town, finally working a regular job. His guitars are gathering dust in storage. Sometimes dreams need to die for reality to begin. The divorce was finalized last week. There wasn't much to fight over. I kept my salary and savings, and he kept his equipment. Tommy chose to live with me full-time, though he sees his father every other weekend. Mom, Tommy said to me yesterday, remember how Dad always said you didn't support his dreams? Yes, I looked up from making dinner in our cozy new kitchen. I think you supported them too much, he said wisely. Sometimes love means saying no. He's right, of course. I spent 13 years saying yes to David's dreams while putting my own on hold. Now, at 33, I'm finally dreaming for myself and for Tommy. We might not have the fancy address anymore, but we have something better: peace, stability, and hope for the future. Sometimes, losing everything you thought you wanted helps you find everything you need. And as for David's parents, they found a nice retirement community nearby. Turns out they never wanted to live with us anyway. That was just David's last attempt to control our lives. Some people might call what I did cruel, but I call it necessary. Sometimes you have to tear everything down to build something better. That's my story. Not of revenge, but of reclaiming my life, my worth, and my future. And I've never been happier.